Introduction. Have you ever heard of an empire that once controlled nearly half the world, only to vanish into thin air after just a single battle? That is the story of Darius III and the mighty Persian Empire. A dynasty holding massive treasures, immortal armies numbering in the tens of thousands, and a territory stretching from India all the way to Greece. And the one who put an end to all that greatness was a young man only 25 years old.
The throne
Alexander
is
the Great.
vulnerable.
But the truth
They
is,
are turning.
Persia didn't fall just because of Macedonian blades. An ancient tree doesn't collapse from a single gust of wind unless its roots have been rotten to the core for a long time. Before Alexander even set foot in Asia, the empire of Darius III was already a giant with feet of clay. Betrayal within the palace walls, constant royal assassinations, caused the Persian throne to change hands in blood. Darius took the throne when the court was already exhausted by poisoning plots and the unchecked power of the eunuchs. The people's loyalty was fading. Distant lands like Egypt or Babylon had long viewed Persia as a foreign oppressor.
Breaking through the
They weren't fighting to protect the emperor. They were just waiting for an excuse to revolt.
We are surrounded. Fall
A
back.
flashy but outdated military,
Cavalry is lost.
while Alexander's modern empire, with the versatile phalanx formation, Darius still relied on overwhelming numbers. Fall back. The Persians are routing. A chaotic
Save the
crowd
supplies.
made up of many ethnic groups with no common language and no common goal. The Battle of Gaugamela was just the final blow dealt to a body that was already severely infected. When Darius turned and fled on his golden chariot, he didn't just leave the battlefield, he left behind a legacy of 200 years that had rotted from within. Persia, from a human miracle to a ticking time bomb. The largest Achaemenid empire in history under Cyrus. The Great wasn't just a nation. It was an unprecedented miracle. Just imagine, when the world was still divided by tribes, stretching from the burning sands of Egypt, building their own armies, brilliant Mesopotamia, to the very borders of India. But that very greatness hid the seeds of a terrifying explosion. At first glance, ruling dozens of ethnic groups, languages, and religions seemed like a sign of unmatched power. But in reality, it was a massive Achilles heel. An army with no shared purpose at the Battle of Gaugamela. Darius III's army vastly outnumbered Alexander's. But it was a chaotic mess. Bactrians, Indians, and Greek mercenaries. They spoke different languages and fought for different reasons. A prime example, when Alexander struck directly at Darius's position, panic spread like a wildfire. Because there was no unity in language or core loyalty, the military units couldn't cover for each other. They didn't flee because they were weak, but because they felt this wasn't their fight. An overextended reach and the rise of local warlords. With an area covering over 5 million square kilometers, sending an order from the capital, Persepolis, to the border regions could take months. Geographical distance turned the governors, or satraps, into actual local kings. Extreme autonomy. The satraps began minting their own coins, and even fighting each other for influence, without even asking the emperor. An example of betrayal. The most painful proof was Bessus, the satrap of Bactria. Instead of protecting the defeated king, Bessus captured and assassinated Darius III himself to plot his own path to kingship. This shows that Persia's political system was so rotten that even those closest to him were ready to stab their leader in the back, just to look out for themselves. The central government withered as its brain became paralyzed, while the satraps grew stronger. Back in the capital, the Persian court sank deeper into plots of poisoning and purges. Corruption within the palace walls. Before Darius III took the throne, a powerful eunuch named Bagoas had successively poisoned two kings, Artaxerxes III and Artaxerxes IV, along with their entire families to pull the strings of power. As a result, Darius III ascended the throne. In a landscape where talented leaders had been slaughtered, the people's faith in the sanctity of the monarchy had hit rock bottom. An empire without stable succession, and a corrupt bureaucratic machine. How could it possibly stand against a war machine as young and fired up as Alexander? Conclusion: Persia didn't fall because Alexander was too strong. It fell because it was already a giant with feet of clay. Alexander was simply the one who delivered the final push to a structure already cracked at the roots. The final battle wasn't the cause. It was just the death warrant for a grand dream that had long passed its expiration date. Part 2. Corruption and Decay. From the peak to the abyss, when ideals are replaced by money. After the death of Darius the Great, Darius I, the man who built the magnificent Persepolis palaces and the intercontinental road system, the Persian machine began to show signs of jamming. Excessive prosperity became a double-edged sword, severing the bond between the king and his subjects.
Fall back!
They've broken the line. Protect the king. Retreat to the camp. Corrupt officials, the termites gnawing at the dynasty. When power is overly concentrated, but lacks oversight, the bureaucracy turns into a den of profiteering. Instead of focusing on governing the nation, local officials focused on selling titles and positions. Justice became a luxury item. For instance, historical records show that during this era, to even get an audience with the governors, the people had to pay massive bribes. This filth caused faith in the central government to completely shatter. Heavy taxes and the misery of the people. To maintain a lavish lifestyle in the capital and pay for failed expeditions, the financial burden was shoved onto the common people. It was a dead end, a cycle of debt. Tax upon tax. Farmers were stripped of their land, and craftsmen were exploited to the bone. As a result, scattered revolts broke out everywhere, from Egypt to Babylon. Instead of seeing the emperor as the king of kings, the people began to see the court as a blood-sucking parasite. When Alexander moved in, many cities threw their gates wide open, welcoming him as a savior, rather than an invader. The Persian army, when the blade only serves the dollar. This was Persia's fatal weakness. An army with no conviction is an army that has lost before the battle even starts. Mercenaries took over. Instead of proud Persian warriors, fighting for family honor, Darius II had to rely on tens of thousands of Greek mercenaries. The danger: these soldiers had zero loyalty. They fought for money, and if the opponent paid more, or if death seemed imminent, they were ready to drop their weapons or desert. The Persian army at this time was like a multinational corporation on the brink of bankruptcy, where everyone only cared about lining their own pockets. But the most dangerous thing was that, in the ancient world, the strength of an empire lay in its national spirit. When the ideal of service is replaced by greed, and discipline is replaced by fragility, then the mighty name of Persia becomes nothing more than a hollow shell. And right then, a ghost appeared from the west. While Persia slept on a pile of rotten gold, their opponent was completely different. A collective forged in hardship, led by a man with a dream of conquering the entire world. And most importantly, they weren't fighting for money. They were fighting to become legends. Darius, the tragedy of an heir. Make no mistake, if Cyrus the Great laid the foundation, and Darius, I built the walls. Then Darius III was the one who had to watch the palace crumble. His biggest mistake wasn't cruelty. It was weakness, in an era that demanded an iron fist. A bloody crown and the loneliness at the top. Darius III wasn't destined to be king. He took the throne after a series of horrific assassinations inside the palace, orchestrated by the eunuch Bagoas.
Hold the line.
Crowned in chaos. When he put that crown on his head, what Darius received wasn't a thriving empire, but a wreckage of suspicion. He had to start his reign by forcing Bagoas to drink his own poison. He had zero street cred with the old nobles and governors. To them, Darius III was just a lucky guy who survived the purges. He lacked the spirit of a warrior and the divine aura of a god king. When the king speaks and no one listens, the empire is nothing but a hollow name. The Achilles heel on the battlefield. The fateful retreat. History might forgive a king who loses a battle, but it rarely forgives a king who runs away. The battles of Issus and Gaugamela. These were two defining moments in history. In both fights, when he saw Alexander's spear closing in, instead of staying to lead his troops to the end, Darius III chose to turn his chariot and flee. The ripple effect. Just imagine, you're a soldier risking it all under a hail of arrows. But when you look back, you see the emperor's flag retreating into the dust. The fighting spirit collapses instantly. An army of tens of thousands falls apart in a heartbeat, not because they were wiped out, but because they felt betrayed by the very person they were protecting. The formula for destruction: strong army, weak king. No matter how elite an army
traces
is,
of Persian control
it's just a soulless
have
mass
faded.
of muscle, without a decisive brain. A brutal contrast. While Alexander was always charging forward, leading with his men, Darius III sat on a high, looming chariot in the back, completely detached from the harsh reality of the battlefield. The inevitable failure. Darius's indecisiveness turned Persia's advantages in numbers, terrain, and finances into a big fat zero. Conclusion. A massive empire can endure a bad king, but it can't survive a weak king. In the middle of an invader's storm. The final turning point. Darius III's life didn't end by Alexander's blade, but by the knife of his own subordinate. That was the final proof that, when a king has no authority left, even his shadow becomes an enemy. To the west, the rise of a perfect war machine. While the Persian Empire slept on piles of gold, and the chaos of court intrigue, a new power in the west was quietly evolving.
Forward! Take the breach!
Macedonia, under the leadership of Alexander the Great. This was no longer a tiny border kingdom, but had become a razor-sharp spear, aimed straight at the heart of Asia. The difference between these two extremes wasn't just about numbers,
Follow me, men! To victory!
but about the essence of power. Alexander the Great, strategic genius and a symbol of wealth. The biggest difference between the two empires was the man at the top. If Darius III was a passive heir, then Alexander was the architect of impossible victories. Tactical vision. Alexander never fought by the book. He possessed a genius-level ability to read the battlefield, always finding openings, even the tiniest gaps in the enemy's massive lines, to deliver the killing blow. This was Persia's fatal flaw. While Darius III sat on a gold-plated chariot, tucked behind tens of thousands of soldier barricades, Alexander was always the first one to dive into the danger zone. The image of the young king and his Hittite cavalry, sweeping right in front of the enemy's spears, created a psychological electric shock.
Push forward as one!
The Macedonians fought to protect a god who was bleeding right alongside them, while the Persians only fought to protect a chariot that was already primed to flee. 1. 2. Elite quality crushes raw numbers. Quality is the ultimate weapon. The Persian army was famous for its sheer size, blotting out the sun. But it was a disjointed mess of dozens of ethnic groups, with no common language. Macedonia was the exact opposite. The classic phalanx formation. Alexander took the phalanx formation to a whole new level. Macedonian soldiers were equipped with sarissa spears, nearly 20 feet long, turning their formation into an impenetrable forest of pikes. The Persians, with their short spears and flimsy wicker shields, could barely even reach the Macedonian lines before being run through. Combined arms coordination. They didn't rely on the chaos of the masses. Alexander's army operated like clockwork. Infantry held the line, cavalry broke through, and archers supported. Each unit knew its job perfectly, creating a level of flexibility that Darius's clunky army could never hope to achieve. 3. Iron discipline and ideals. When every soldier is part of a legend. Persia's hollowness came from the fact that their troops only fought for a paycheck or because they were forced. Macedonia, however, had a completely different bloodline. Relentless discipline. The Macedonian army was forged through lightning-fast marches, crossing the harshest terrain without a single complaint. They didn't fight out of fear of the king's punishment. They fought for national pride and the tight bond between brothers in arms who had bled together. The undefeated spirit. Under Alexander's lead, the Macedonians believed they were invincible. This confidence turned them into predators. On the battlefield,
This was
they
not
never
a
flinched,
war.
no
It
matter
was
how much they were
evolution.
outnumbered, because they knew that a lion leading a flock of sheep will always beat a sheep leading a pride of lions. The inevitable collision, when these two forces met. It was no longer just a war over territory. It was personal. It was a confrontation between the past and the future. On one side, the massive Persian Empire, poisoned by corruption, division,
Spears ready.
and an indecisive king.
Brace for
On the other, the lean, disciplined Macedonia, led by a genius who didn't know the meaning of defeat. Alexander's blade didn't just pierce the Persian army. It stabbed a system that had been rotting from the inside for decades.
hold the line.
Gaugamela, the lethal strike to the
Steady
heart of
advance.
the empire. Ephesus was a warning. Then Gaugamela was the death sentence for the Achaemenid dynasty. This was where Darius III went all in to put an end to that arrogant brat from Macedonia.
Center units.
But he never
expand
expected
your
that
lines.
his own thorough
Flanks,
preparations
quicken the pace.
would become a suicidal
Adjust
trap.
formation now.
The right place at the right time. Darius III wasn't being careless. He had prepared a playground where, theoretically, Alexander had zero chance of winning. Overwhelming numbers. According to historians, the Persian army outnumbered the Macedonians 5-1.
They've
A sea of
broken
people
through.
stretching as
Fall
far as the eye
back.
could see, with enough power to surround
Run!
and swallow
Save
any
yourselves!
formation.
Breach widening
Choosing
as
the ground.
Macedonian blue
Darius
forces pushed
chose the
deeper
flat,
into the
vast
Persian
plains
heart.
of Gaugamela. He even had the ground, leveled out, to create optimal conditions for his heavy weaponry. Everything was set. Weapons of destruction. For the first time, Alexander had to face scythe chariots, meat-grinding machines with blades attached to the wheel axles, and a massive fleet of war elephants from India. Darius's goal was clear. Use mechanical power and beasts to tear apart
Retreat.
Macedonia's
No,
proud
to the river.
phalanx.
Fall back now.
Alexander's madness.
Move forward.
A strike to the central nervous
Victory.
system.
We are surrounded.
Facing a battle that couldn't be
Fall
won.
back. Save yourselves.
With a conventional head-on attack, Alexander made a move that later military tacticians would call the strike of God.
Fall
Pull
back.
back.
Save yourselves.
Save yourselves.
We are completely
Deception
overrun.
tactics.
Retreat.
Instead of charging straight into the middle,
Run. The structure
Alexander
has
moved
collapsed.
his troops diagonally to the right. This forced the massive Persian formation to stretch out to keep pace. creating a gap. While the Persians were busy destroying the right wing, a small crack appeared right in the center, exactly where Darius III's chariot was stationed. The lethal thrust, seizing the golden moment. Alexander and his elite companion cavalry formed a wedge-shaped arrow, piercing through the thin defensive layer to charge straight at the emperor's position. He fought to destroy the leader's will. The chain reaction, a fleeing king and the collapse of faith. The moment Alexander got close enough to see Darius's face, the course of world history shifted. Darius panicked. Faced with imminent death once again, survival instinct won over royal honor. Darius turned his chariot and fled the battlefield. Psychological shock. In an instant, rumors that the emperor had run away spread like a wildfire.
Power's true strength is found in unity, not vastness. For what is wide but not
The
one
Persian army,
is easily
already a
broken.
forced collection of various ethnicities, immediately lost its only glue. Instant collapse. Thousands of soldiers who held the advantage suddenly dropped their weapons and followed the king in flight. Gaugamela ended. Not because the Macedonians had killed everyone, but because the heart of the empire had stopped beating. Lessons from Gaugamela. A vast empire spanning millions of square miles, an army of 1 million men, and endless gold reserves. It all became meaningless when the top leader abandoned his post. Alexander proved a brutal truth. A strong army with a weak king is just a crowd waiting to be slaughtered. The Persian Empire didn't fall on the sands of Gaugamela. It fell in the hearts and minds of the Persian soldiers themselves, the moment they saw the king's chariot disappear into the dust of retreat. Persia, the collapse of an exhausted giant. History often praises Alexander's genius, but if we look objectively, we see that Persia lost. Not because they lacked weapons, but because they had lost the nation's soul, long before the battle even began. The trap of greatness, too big to control. When an empire stretches across too many time zones, too many terrains, and too many ethnicities, it begins to thin out, a breakdown in communication. Darius III sat in Persepolis, but had no clue what was actually happening. On the distant borders, a bloated administrative system meant strategic decisions were always one step behind the enemy. Fragmenting territories, places like Egypt and Babylon, no longer felt like they were part of Persia. They were just colonies, waiting for a liberator. When Alexander arrived, he didn't face the resistance of a united people, but only the weak defiance of a crumbling, ruling machine. 2. Corruption, the termite gnawing at trust. An empire is only strong when its people and soldiers, believing in its ideals. In the Persia of Darius III, that belief had been incinerated by greed. The corruption of the elite. Officials and satraps were only interested in looting to build their own private kingdoms. Heavy taxes left the people resentful. A loss of legitimacy. When a government exists only to exploit, the people no longer have a reason to defend it. Persia lost because they no longer had a solid home front backing. Their army. Three, weak leadership. Losing the lighthouse in the middle of a storm. In ancient history, the king was everything. The king was the law, the religion, and the spirit of the military. The frailty of Darius III. He was not a warrior. His indecision and tendency to flee created a horrific domino effect. An army of 1 million men can endure the death of a general, but it cannot endure the cowardice of its king. The consequence, when the lighthouse flickers out, the entire army falls into darkness and chaos. An extraordinary opponent when genius meets opportunity. We cannot deny Alexander's stature. He didn't just defeat Persia with force, but with a total superiority of mind. The evolution of warfare, Alexander represented a new generation. Young, reckless, disciplined, and highly creative. He turned his army into a single unified body, while the Persian military remained just a collection of disjointed pieces. 3. Conclusion: the nudge of destiny. The Persian Empire at that time was like a massive, magnificent sandcastle, but its foundations had been eroded long ago by the tides of corruption and division. Alexander didn't destroy Persia. He simply pushed it over when it was already about to collapse. If it hadn't been Alexander, sooner or later there would have been another push from another force. Because an empire cannot exist based on fear and money alone if it has already lost its unity while fighting spirit from within. When the walls crumble from the inside, the story of the fall of Darius III is not just a chapter of history about swords and chariots. It is a vital lesson about the survival of every organization, every nation, and even each of us. History has proven a brutal truth. No matter how powerful an empire is, no matter how full the treasuries are with gold and silver, if the core values inside have rotted away through corruption, then the trust is broken. If the trust between the leader and the people is fractured, and if discipline is replaced by self-indulgence and cowardice, Alexander the Great didn't need to be a god. He was simply the one who delivered the final blow to an entity that could no longer stand on its own 2 feet. A sandcastle, no matter how grand, will vanish when the fierce waves hit. If the foundation has been hollowed out by termites long ago, what did you learn from the fall of the giant? Persia? History always repeats itself, and the lessons of the past are the mirror held up to the present. If you found this story interesting and want to join me in exploring more hidden, dramatic corners, military geniuses, or once legendary empires, don't forget to hit like to show your support.
What can we learn?
Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell right now so we can meet again in even more insightful and engaging analysis videos about the turning points of humanity. Thank you for joining me until this very moment. See you in the next video.